example, you wanted to study the effects of nicotine on your memory. Okay, and this is, by the way, a hypothetical experiment. Hasn't been done as far as I know. Or maybe it has, likely it has been done, but I don't know what the real results are. So we'll just go with the ones that I have here. So you have, the first factor is the quantity of nicotine in the system, okay? So either people had no exposure to nicotine for 24 hours prior to the experiment, or they had a cigarette 5 minutes before you asked them to recall a list of words that they memorized, or you've given them a nicotine patch, okay, before they had to do their recall. And you have some suspicion that really the quantity of nicotine or exposure of nicotine, that effect is going to be different for a population of smokers and non-smokers, right? So if you have a person who has never had a cigarette in their life, their behavior may be affected different by this nicotine in their system, suddenly appearing in their system, rather than a person who has smoked for some time, right? So you want to study the effects of these two variables on memory, or on the number or the percentage of the words that people are able to recall. Okay, so these are the averages that you get for each one of your conditions. All right, so you have smokers performing this test, and some of them, for example, are deprived. Okay, they don't smoke for 24 hours, and their recall is 30% in that case. Okay, some of them had a cigarette 5 minutes before the actual experiment, and their performance is now 80%. They're able to recall 80% of the words that they memorized, and so on. Okay, so now we want to see, is there a main effect of either one of these independent variables? So what do? We calculate the marginal means. Okay? We calculate the marginal means, and now we can ask that question. Are the marginal means for one factor, are they equal or are they different? Now granted, normally when you ask this question, you're not just asking whether they're equal or not. You're asking whether they're reliably different, statistically different. But for the purposes of today's class, let's just forget about the statistical mumbo jumbo and just let's think that, if they are different here, then they must be different. Okay? So, how different are they exactly? Well, let's look at them in the form of graphs. So this graph shows you the main effect of nicotine addiction alone, okay, on the recall. So this shows you the performance of smokers and non-smokers. And what can you see from this graph? Can anyone give me like a quick, a short storyline? Anyone? A headline? If you were to see this graph in newspaper, yeah, go ahead.
Non-smokers perform better on memory tests than smokers.
Yeah, that's right. They seem to perform much better. Okay, well, you might think that I'm biased here. Let's take a look at the main effect of quantity of nicotine. What sort of story can we make from this graph? Anyone? Any headlines? Does this graph make any headlines? Does it make me think of anything interesting? No? Okay, let me try. Let me see if I can manage. Well, you see that having a cigarette 5 minutes before you do the recall, or having nicotine gum, boosts the performance. The percentage of recall, of words recalled, is higher. And not having one, or not having any nicotine, makes the performance very low. So it seems like we're getting two very contradictory stories here, right? What's going on? Is the effect of nicotine positive or is it negative? I have no idea. And that is exactly why we need to take a look at the interaction. Okay? So in order to take a look at the interaction, you want to separate the graphs, right? You want to graph the performance of smokers and non-smokers separately. And that's exactly what I told you when we got started. So if you were not addicted to nicotine, if you were a non-smoker, then actually being exposed to nicotine would reduce your recall, right? Judging from this graph. But if you were a smoker, then nicotine would actually help you in terms of the number of words you're going to recall. Does this make sense? Yeah? Okay. So, what is an interaction then? Or what kind of question are we asking when we're looking for an interaction? Well, the question that we are asking is whether the pattern of differences within each level of a particular independent variable is the same, or is it different? So for example, in this 2x2 graph, so this is a 2x2 experiment, you might ask yourself a question, whether or not the effect of factor A is the same for the first level of variable B, as it is for the second level of variable B. So rather than looking at mean effects, where you're considering the marginal means, the means for, say, a row or column, we're now looking at the actual means inside these gray cells. And the computation that we're performing is a very simple one, right? So like I said, when you're conducting an experiment, you're interested in the difference between conditions. So if you want to see whether the effect of A is the same within the different levels of factor B, that's exactly what you would be doing. You would be looking at the difference between these conditions. All right? So in order to calculate the effect of A at the first level of factor B, you would basically take this first row of cells, right? And you could either subtract the cell on the right from the cell on the left, or vice versa. Just remember to be consistent when you're doing it for the second row as well. So in this particular case, what I did is I subtracted from the second, subtracted the mean of the first cell from the second cell. Okay? So for the first row, the difference is 5. And for the second row, the difference is 5. So what this means, what this tells me, is the effect of the factor A is the same for these two different levels of factor B. Similarly, I could ask the same question about the factor B. And as you can see from the calculation performed here, the difference once again is going to be the same. Are there any questions about this? Is something unclear about this? The computation that I'm performing? If not, I can make a conclusion that since the differences are the same at each level, there is no interaction. Okay? And in fact, were I to plot this, what I would see is that yes, there is a main effect of A, right? So you see that on average, let's say for example it's a reaction time. On average, reaction time increases when you go from A1 to A2, okay? And also, on average, the reaction time increases when you go from B1 to B2, right? There's a difference between these two lines, they're separated. So the mean effects are present with both factors, but the lines are parallel, there is no interaction. And here I'm going to give away a a rule that kind of makes this very simple, all right? I'd like you to understand it, but I'll admit I use a simple rule myself very frequently. So, if you want to determine whether or not there is an interaction, you look at the slopes of these lines. If the slopes are equal, then there is no interaction. If the slopes are unequal, then there is an interaction. Of course, you have to perform statistical tests, blah, 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 to see if these effects are reliable. But if you're ever shown a graph on an exam, and you're asked this question, if you see the lines